We are here to consider three of the nominees for various positions. First, we have Carl W. Benzel, who has been renominated as the Federal Maritime Commissioner. Mr. Benzel is a Commerce Committee staff alum, having served as a senior Democratic counsel, spent 4 years with the House on the Merchant Marine and Fisheries Committee, served on the FMC since 2019, where he spent a great deal of time focused on the issues that we experienced through the COVID pandemic, obviously U.S. supply chain disruption, but more importantly, carriers who were leaving U.S. products on the dock and returning without our cargo. Mr. Vincent has been very active in the Commission's efforts to increase transparency, awareness, and accountability for those involved in the maritime shipping supply chain and the impacts that we suffered under. Under the Shipping Act, the Commission protects shippers and consumers from unfair and deceptive practices in the shipping industry. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed deep maritime supply chain resiliency challenges, and Congress responded in two important ways. To address the capital challenge, we had a historic $2.25 billion in port infrastructure in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and we passed the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, which provides the Commission with the tools they need to crack down on bad actors, protect American businesses and consumers, and we look forward to hearing from you on that continued important work on the Commission. Next, we have Tom Chapman, who has been nominated to serve as a member of the National Transportation Safety Board, where he has been a member since 2020. In his 4 years on the board, Mr. Chapman has a strong advocate voice for safety system approaches to everything from highway traffic safety, and has championed NTSB's research into preventing intoxicated driving and speeding related deaths. Mr. Chapman is also a strong advocate for safety at highway grade crossing for rail workers, having lost his grandfather in a grade crossing accident when he was younger. And sorry for that loss, Mr. Chapman. I must note that Mr. Chapman also has roots here in the committee, first working for Senator Nelson and then on the aviation subcommittee for a time period before he went to NTSB. With more than 4 decades of experience in transportation-related matters, Mr. Chapman has served in roles at U.S. Airways, Southwest Airlines, and the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. He has also earned his own private pilot certificate, and I believe his background on aviation is critical to the ongoing Alaska investigation. I believe that the NTSB's work has never been more important or more needed. East Palestine's Ohio rail derailment, or the Alaska issue, or this Francis Scott Key Bridge incident in Baltimore. So it's so important that our committee did reauthorize the NTSB for another 5 years, giving its highest funding authorization that it's received in decades to have more investigators respond to emerging technology and continue its mission to save lives. The FAA authorization also directed the FAA to implement critical NTSB recommendations to strengthen aviation safety, including a new requirement to install a 25-hour cockpit voice recorder in commercial aircraft to help investigators at the NTSB, and also directing the FAA to adopt a surface surveillance technology, ASDEX, at every large and medium hub airport to reduce close calls across the country. We appreciate Mr. Chapman's tireless work on these issues and the NTSB investigations, and I'm sure we'll hear more about how to enhance safety from Mr. Chapman. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. He J. Chen, who has been nominated to serve on Amtrak's Board of Directors. The Amtrak Board of Directors plays an important role in ensuring safety and quality service on our nation's transportation system. I think we're here this morning as opposed to last week. I don't think we had the paperwork finished, and so that's why you weren't included with some of the other colleagues, but including overseeing the historic investment in Amtrak and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Mr. Chen has had a distinguished career in academia, public service, and the private sector, and from 2014 to 2018, he was confirmed by the Senate as a member of the Social Security Advisory Board, previously serving as a senior official at the Department of Health and Human Services during the Bush administration. He has also served as policy director for Senator Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign And our colleague is here from Utah, I'm sure, to give us some more words of wisdom on support for Mr. Chen. And so we thank you for joining us today. And after I turn to my colleague, we'll then turn to you for your remarks. But Amtrak is in the middle of one of the most significant transportation changes since its founding more than 50 years ago, with ridership on track to exceed pre-pandemic levels this year. And as we said earlier this month, we're happy to consider the nominees who bring the much-needed geographic diversity to the board. And thanks to the advocacy of my colleagues from the West, like Senator Tester, on these issues, we are seeing that diversity. So I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you for your willingness to serve and come before the committee. And now I will turn to Ranking Member Cruz for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This morning, we will hear from nominees to the Amtrak Board of Directors, the Federal Maritime Commission, and the National Transportation Safety Board, or the NTSB. The nominee to the Amtrak Board is Mr. Lan-Hee Chen. Mr. Chen received his JD and his PhD from Harvard and has deep experience in business, financial management, and policy. In addition to serving on the boards of both private companies and nonprofits, he was nominated and confirmed by voice vote to the Social Security Advisory Board in 2014. Mr. Chen would be a strong addition to the Amtrak Board. Having a director with his acumen is particularly important as Amtrak examines service expansions and struggles to manage major capital projects effectively. I look forward to hearing more about his qualifications for this important post from Senator Romney, his former boss and our colleague, who will be formally introducing him in just a moment. Federal Maritime Commissioner Carl Bentzel will also appear before us today. Mr. Bentzel has been nominated for a second term on the Federal Maritime Commission, or the FMC. The FMC is the federal agency charged with ensuring ocean transportation is competitive and abides by the Shipping Act, protecting both American consumers and shippers. Last Congress, Senators Thune and Klobuchar worked on legislation to reauthorize the FMC, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. I look forward to hearing from Mr. Bentzel on the Commission's progress implementing that legislation, as well as his views on what may be next for the FMC. Mr. Bentzel's confirmation hearing is timely, as the U.S. teeters on the brink of the first union strike among East and Gulf Coast ports since 1977. As usual, the Biden-Harris administration seems to have been caught unaware of the potential for a strike and has shown little leadership in bringing the parties together to negotiate a deal and prevent a strike. Let's be clear about the potential consequences of a strike. A J.P. Morgan analysis quoted in the New York Times yesterday projected that a port strike could cost the American economy $5 billion per day. I hope the administration is able to avert that strike. While the FMC will not have a role in the negotiations themselves, the Commission issued a notice on Monday that it will continue to monitor transportation stakeholder practices for any violations of the Shipping Act as transportation providers and shippers look to move their goods. Finally, we will hear from Thomas Chapman, who has been nominated for a second term on the NTSB. The NTSB investigates transportation accidents and other incidents to identify their causes and to recommend safety improvements to prevent similar incidents in the future. The NTSB is not a regulator and has no power to mandate adoption of his recommendations. But because of the NTSB's reputation for thorough and accurate investigations, the results of his investigations are well regarded around the world, and agencies and companies often implement NTSB recommendations voluntarily. The NTSB also provides valuable information for Congress and federal agencies to consider when developing transportation policy. Mr. Chapman has many years of experience working on aviation issues, including as on staff to this very committee. During his first term at the NTSB, Mr. Chapman increased his attention on roadway safety and recommended several changes to traffic policy. I agree that roadway safety is an important priority. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, there were almost 41,000 motor vehicle traffic fatalities last year. I look forward to hearing from Mr. Chapman on how we might reduce those numbers without burdensome regulations or reducing consumer choice. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. And before I turn to our colleague, Senator Romney, I just want to note that in the audience with us today is NTSB Chair Jennifer Hamady. Thank you for being here. I'm assuming in support of our nominee. We have two FMC commissioners, Commissioner Vekich and Commissioner Maffei. Thank you for being here as well. Senator Romney, welcome to the Commerce Committee. We look forward to hearing your remarks.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell, and thank you, Ranking Member Cruz. I have to admit that had I seen this hearing room before, I might have been very tempted to become a member of this committee. A lot better than the ones I normally attend. I'm delighted today to be able to introduce a friend of mine, and a colleague, and someone I respect very deeply, Chen. He's been an advisor for me over more than a decade. And I actually think he would be an excellent member of the board of directors of Amtrak. Obviously, Amtrak's board is responsible for setting policy and overseeing management and the strategic direction of Amtrak. And I can't think of a person more intellectually and emotionally suited for a role of that nature than Chen. Because he's brilliant, because he's a man of integrity, because his life experience shows that he's had a career that has expanded the government sector, the private sector, policy areas, academia. Really quite an extraordinary man. As you know, he's the son of Taiwanese immigrants, and he attended Harvard College, where he graduated magna cum laude in government. Then he went on to get a PhD in political science at Harvard University and get a law degree from Harvard Law School. It seems no other university would take him. Lonnie has served on the board of both of my presidential campaigns, and I entrusted him to spearhead the policy direction for my campaign and to be my chief policy advisor. He did that without a partisan bent. He did that entirely based upon the intellectual capacity that he brought to the team and offered superb advice. From 2014 to 2018, as Chair Cantwell has indicated, he was appointed by President Obama to serve as a member of the Social Security Advisory Board. He's currently the Director of Domestic Policy Studies and a lecturer at Stanford University, as well as a fellow at the Hoover Institution. He lives in the Bay Area with his wife, Cynthia, who, by the way, is brilliant in her own right, and they have two children, Chen.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Romney, and very much appreciate you and your busy schedule coming here to advocate on behalf of Dr. Chen, so thank you. We'll now turn to our nominees and witnesses, and we'll start with you, Mr. Benzel. Thank you for being here.
Well, Ranking Member Cruz, members of the committee, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to appear here to be considered for nomination as FMC Commissioner. I would ask your permission for my formal statement to be inserted in the record.
Without objection.
I would like to recognize my chairman, Dan Maffei, and Commissioner Vekich, and thank them for being here in support of attendance. And most importantly, I want to recognize my wife, Suzanne Bensel, whom I met and fell for while as a staffer here in the Senate Commerce Committee. I would also like to—
Mark one down for the Commerce.
Finally, I'd like to thank President Biden for renominating me. When I came before this committee as a nominee 5 years ago, the world and the Federal Maritime Commission were a different place. The pandemic had not yet gripped the country. The shipping industry, although essential to the nation's economy, was invisible to the public eye. Then it wasn't. The earliest part of the pandemic resulted in reductions of over 20% of imports through our West Coast ports. And then by the early summer, we swung to over 30% increases, a stunning change in demand. During the entirety of the pandemic, we saw 27% increases of imported containers and 1% increases of exports. Movement of enhanced cargo volumes were first stymied on the West Coast with a lack of intermodal chassis, and then by Chinese government-controlled container manufacturers intentionally suppressing production of containers. Container shipping lines ultimately were forced to wait off the coast of the United States for 1 to 2 weeks over essentially what became a 2-year period. The result of congestion and enhanced supply need were that spot shipping rates increased by factors of 10 to 15 times prior to the pandemic. And even more importantly, transits took more than 3 times longer. In my view, this was the most singularly important factor in driving inflationary costs. Congress, and specifically this committee, responded to the shipping challenges by passing the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. And since that time, the Commission has been busy and engaged in implementation of the act. This summer, the Commission released final rules on detention and demurrage and refusals of service. In addition, the FMC has put in place a charge complaint process mandated through OSRA that allows shippers to file complaints and get streamlined resolution for shipper conflicts. Over $12 billion were assessed in detention and demurrage by ocean carriers and marine terminals over the course of the pandemic. Some were justified, others were not. The FMC is challenged accommodating the volume of legal cases and are currently processing more complaints than any time in our history. The FMC is an independent agency with specialized experience in international ocean liner transportation service. The agency is charged with the responsibility of administering a law that, in addition to protecting the public from unfair practices, provides a focused antitrust regulatory regime tailored to factors affecting regularly scheduled international ocean shipping trade. For sake of brevity, the FMC's objectives are to maintain an open, competitive, reliable international ocean shipping system and protect the shipping public from unlawful, unfair, and deceptive ocean shipping practices. I did want to identify a few general policy areas that I believe will be important as the FMC moves to the future. The maritime industry is increasingly tied to the efficiencies of their intermodal partners in moving cargo through marine terminals and ports and onto the surface transportation modes. There are multiple players involved in port and maritime terminal management, and throughput infrastructure is often a shared venture. Fostering greater intermodal connectivity while addressing societal, environmental, and quality of life challenges will continue to be at the forefront of any new investments. Another area of potential concern are impacts of consolidation. While I believe the ocean shipping market remains strongly competitive, I also recognize the need for continued vigilance. The U.S. antitrust guidelines governing competition used by the FMC can be used to conclude that the international ocean liner industry market is very competitive. However, we need to continue to require greater scrutiny given nationalization of some of the shipping lines and the economic stakes that could be involved in a potential market manipulation. I would be remiss if I did not mention one area of particular concern related to the overall health and long-term stability of the international shipping industry, and that is the concerted efforts by the People's Republic of China to secure market dominance in international shipping. The PRC has invested heavily to ensure that China will continue to dominate in multiple aspects of maritime trade as an instrument of its foreign policy. Chinese government-controlled companies manufacture over 98% of the marine containers used in world trade, 80% of the intermodal shipping chassis used in trucking containers, 60% of the ships used in the international commercial fleet, and over 20% of our regularly scheduled ocean carrier service providers are government-controlled. In my view, this issue needs more attention than what we can do at the FMC, but it is an expanding risk. Chair Cantwell and Ranking Member Cruz, I want to thank you and your staffs again for their courtesies, and I'm pleased to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Benzel, and we will definitely get to those very important FMC questions and the Shipping Reform Act and many other things. Mr. Chapman, welcome back. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you for your willingness to serve another term.
Chair Cantwell and Ranking Member Cruz, thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you today. I am honored to be nominated by the President to serve a second term as a member of the National Transportation Safety Board. I very much appreciate the support of NTSB Board Chair Jennifer Homendy, who is here with us today. And I am grateful to my remarkable colleagues at NTSB for all they do to promote safety. My work as a board member has been a rewarding opportunity to apply my experience and skills in a role allowing me to give back through public service. Before proceeding, I want to say a few words about the two people most important to me. For an important reason I will explain, neither of them were able to accompany me today. My wife, Scotty O'Connell, is my partner and my best friend, and she has been for these past 38 years. Scotty is currently in London with our amazing son, Patrick, helping him to settle into what the British call a flat. Next week, Patrick begins his course of study in pursuit of a master's degree at the London School of Economics, and his old mom and dad couldn't be more proud. Madam Chair, my more than 4 decades of experience, most of it in the aviation industry, have prepared me well for the tasks I find so fulfilling at NTSB. Throughout my career, I have been deeply involved in an extensive range of issues, often playing a key role in identifying and negotiating resolutions. And in varying degrees, virtually every aspect of aviation involves considerations of safety. Consequently, an awareness and a sensitivity to a pervasive culture of safety is embedded in my professional approach. I have sought to bring that perspective to my work as a board member in pursuit of the critical safety mission of the NTSB. In addition to my experience, I bring at least 2 qualities to the position which I believe are valuable. First, I benefit from an established reputation for collegiality and consensus building. Second, I am committed to public service, and I believe that much is expected from those who are most fortunate. I am an aggressive advocate for the policy positions I am professionally obliged or personally committed to represent. However, I strive to demonstrate respect and appreciation for the views of those with whom I may disagree. And I believe in compromise, and I take pride in crafting solutions that will accommodate seemingly conflicting points of view. Many of those I consider my most valued professional friends and associates are also those with whom I have most significantly clashed over past policy disputes. As for my commitment to service, I view it as a responsibility for those who are fortunate to have prospered from professional life in the private sector. Immediately prior to joining NTSB, I was privileged to serve for 6 years on the staff of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. In 2014, I left the airline industry and joined the Aviation Subcommittee staff in anticipation of the major legislative effort required to reauthorize the Federal Aviation Administration. Throughout my years with the committee, I worked collaboratively with the bipartisan Senate team, and our efforts contributed to passage of various significant legislative measures, including the FAA Extension, Safety, and Security Act of 2016 and the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018. As an NTSB board member, I devote much of my attention to traffic safety because that is where our greatest safety challenges lie. I speak extensively on the safe system approach to traffic safety, pedestrian safety, alcohol and drug impairment, and rail worker and highway rail grade crossing hazards. I am especially active on key initiatives to address 2 stubbornly persistent challenges. That is alcohol-impaired driving and excessive speed. I am proud of the important public policy accomplishments to which I have contributed as a former member of the Commerce Committee staff and since joining the National Transportation Safety Board. I welcome the prospect of building on those efforts through additional service as a second-term member of the NTSB. That concludes my formal remarks, and I'm happy to respond to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Dr. Chen, welcome. We look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, and members of the committee. My name is Lan Hee Chen, and I'm honored to appear before you today as a nominee for the Amtrak Board of Directors. I'm grateful to the President for the trust he has placed in me and honored by Leader McConnell's support of me over many years. Also deeply indebted to Senator Romney, who's been a mentor and friend, and humbled by his overly kind introduction of me. I'm so happy to be joined today by my daughter, Adeline, who gets to see her daddy, and perhaps more importantly, the Senate at work. There are 2 other members of my family who could not be here today, my wife, Cynthia, for whom I am always grateful, and our son, Tobin. I was born in North Carolina, the son of 2 immigrants from Taiwan, whose decisions to come to America made all of this possible, and for that I'm grateful. I grew up in Southern California and now live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've spent my career at the intersection of business, government, and public policy, and believe this background will bring much-needed perspective to the Amtrak board. I have significant experience as a board member in corporate, nonprofit, and government settings. For example, I have served since 2015 on the board of El Camino Health, a community-based healthcare system in Northern California. I chaired the board for 5 years, currently chair its governance committee, and formerly chaired both the audit and executive compensation committees. I was nominated by President Obama and confirmed by the Senate to serve on the Social Security Advisory Board from 2014 to 2018, which provides counsel on the Social Security program to policymakers in Congress and beyond. My interest in passenger trains began when I was a young boy. I would visit the Fullerton, California Railroad Station with my dad to see the Amtrak trains that stopped there. We scoured local hobby shops for model Amtrak locomotives and coaches, which I proudly displayed in my room, or sometimes got to run on tracks, which took over our entire living room. I'm fortunate to still live in California, which has frequent Amtrak service along multiple corridors that link many of its major metropolitan areas and smaller communities in between, thanks largely to past state investments. I've been a passenger on Amtrak's state-supported routes in California, like the Pacific Surfliner and Capitol Corridor, and on trains along the Northeast Corridor. I believe that Congress clearly intended to have more representation from the national network on the Amtrak board, and as a Californian, I look forward to helping to realize that goal. There are several things I believe I would bring to the Amtrak board if confirmed. The first is board experience in a quasi-public setting. The health system board on which I have served for nearly a decade has both fiduciary responsibilities and a public mission. That is also true of Amtrak, which by law is directed both to operate like a business and to provide passenger rail service that may not produce financial returns, but benefits the travelers and communities it serves, particularly those without other transportation options. Balancing financial prudence and a public mission is not an unfamiliar concept to me. I also have significant business experience. I've furnished counsel to corporate leaders on strategic and reputational concerns, evaluated and recommended investments in early-stage companies, and advised businesses as they navigate the marketplace and consider the impacts of regulation and policy on their work. Finally, I have familiarity with both federal and state policy issues, including infrastructure and publicly funded programs. As a result of my service on the Social Security Advisory Board, my work as a policy advisor to 4 presidential campaigns, my candidacy for the position of California State Controller, my state's chief fiscal officer, and from my work in academia at the Hoover Institution, one of America's leading research institutes. From my board service, I recognize that one of the most important responsibilities of any director is to ensure that management is accountable for results. That obligation is heightened for organizations like Amtrak, which receives government funding intended to benefit the American people. This accountability must extend beyond the board to Amtrak's customers, employees, taxpayers, and the elected officials like you who approve its funding. Amtrak's board has a responsibility not only to ensure that the taxpayer dollars the organization receives are well spent, but also to emphasize the importance of maintaining the highest standards of safety, timeliness, and customer service, and to help formulate a strategy to increase revenues so that more funding is available for services and investments that fulfill the organization's mission. If confirmed to the Amtrak board, I will work to ensure that Amtrak does business transparently, operates in a fiscally responsible manner, and serves the needs of passengers who ride its trains and the states that provide funding both for daily service and longer-term capital investments. Again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. We'll now go to questioning, and I'll start this off with you, Mr. Benzel. Detention and demurrage fees greatly impact our shippers, and this was part of the Ocean Reform Shipping Act, as well as the American consumer. And between 2020 and 2022, 9 of the largest carriers serving U.S. Liner trade charged approximately $8.9 billion in demurrage and detention fees above the shipping costs. Last week, the Commission published a final rule on detention and demurrage and what practices could be used to help cut down on costs and improve transparency. Can you explain how you think this new rule will help American businesses?
Yes, Chairman. Well, I believe that what you did here in the Commerce Committee to provide guidance on how to evaluate these claims for detention and demurrage was the singular most important thing that we could have done, and challenging those that were unfairly assessed really gave a prescriptive set of requirements on how you should provide billing and assessment to the claims. So I think the steps that you took to require a simplified process is the number one tool that we can use to challenge those that are unfairly assessed. So we also, Chairman Maffei established an audit of all of the ocean carriers to assess their process, and our staff works routinely with them. So I think those two efforts have really taken a lot of the challenge that we would have faced ordinarily without legislative change.
Well, this was a very bipartisan effort. Obviously, our colleagues, Senator Klobuchar and Senator Thune, taking the lead on that legislation, and then us working with our House colleagues and Congressman Garamendi to make sure that we got this over the goal line. But what is it in the transparency aspect that is allowing the U.S. to feel more comfortable? Is it that we're being able to discern these issues and thereby being able to detect something that is an unfair practice?
You know, we don't have as much transparency as I would like in the ocean shipping world. If I were to try to get an airline ticket to LA 5 months from now, I would know exactly what was going to happen and when it would arrive. And so I am looking at issues related to creating greater transparency on the system of movement. Really, we're now not in a position of allowing U.S. consumers to do advanced planning or to anticipate when there's delays in shipping, and there are delays. And it's not always the fault of the carriers. It's issues related to the Red Sea and Suez Canal and Panama, but we do need...
Well, you would say that when U.S. agriculture product was left on the docks and ships returned empty because they could make more money by hurrying back than taking U.S. products back, that was a problem.
It's a huge problem.
Okay.
We're here to protect the U.S. consumer and to ensure that services are fair, reasonably accessible to all parties.
I think our point was if you're calling on U.S. ports, then you have to have a fair trade. You have to have a fair transportation trade. You can't have like mysterious practices where all of a sudden you got to go and you leave things on the dock. So that was our main point. Unfortunately, I got to get to other people. And Dr. Chen, it may take me 2 rounds on all our questions, but that's okay. We have lots of colleagues who want to ask questions. Thank you again for your willingness to serve. You know, these issues about the Amtrak board and experience, and you certainly have a wealth of experience. And so it's good to hear your love and passion for the rail system. One of the things that came up is your work, obviously, working for Senator Romney, and the fact that some you've expressed support for President Trump's budget. I just need to know, where are you on long-distance Amtrak service? What are your thoughts about that?
Chair Cantwell, thank you for the question. I'm very supportive of Amtrak's long-distance mission. I think Amtrak has a couple of goals, as I noted in my introductory remarks. Obviously, there is a mandate for Amtrak to be run as a business, but more importantly, perhaps, there is a public mission to Amtrak as well. And the long-distance component is critically important to the future of Amtrak. And if you look historically, it is a big part of Amtrak's heritage as well. So if confirmed to the board, I would be an advocate and supporter of long-distance trains and long-distance rail and the communities it serves throughout the United States, urban and rural.
Thank you. That's good to hear. And I'm glad to hear of your support on the high-speed rail corridor in California. I'm sure Californians will be happy about that. We obviously have our own ideas in the Northwest, what we would like to see. But we'll get to that in a second round. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to each of the 3 nominees being here today. Mr. Benzel, since the horrific October 7th massacre in Israel, almost 1 year ago, the Houthi terrorists in Yemen have been launching attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea. So far, the Houthis have targeted over 70 vessels, including U.S. flagships, which has resulted in sinkings, shipping delays, and increased cost as many vessels are diverted around Africa. Mr. Bensel, you noted the Houthis are targeting international trade to support Hamas against Israel. During a recent FMC hearing, you said that you were evaluating whether the Houthis, quote, politically generated attacks on international shipping are violations of U.S. and international law. You explained that, quote, Yemen could be the target nation for failure to adequately protect the right of innocent passage through its territorial waters. Mr. Bensel, you clearly believe supporting the Houthi rocket attacks is a violation of international law, and I agree with you. What countries are supporting the Houthis?
I'm not the best person to get into that issue, but I believe there are some issues related to Chinese support of the Houthis. There's issues in Iran as well that affect shipping. So the issue has been a hot spot, a trouble area. Most nations adhere to the law of the sea, which requires the protection of innocent passage through their waters. And so looking at that, I feel reasonably comfortable in saying they're in violation, at least in Yemen, which is questionable in terms of their territorial prerogatives and sovereignty, of violating the articles of in the law of the sea that require them to protect innocent passage.
Well, you're certainly right that both China and Iran have active involvement in the Houthis' attacks. And although the Houthis operate out of Yemen, Iran's providing them with money, with training, with equipment, and with strategic information. According to the Defense Department, without Iran's assistance, quote, the Houthis would struggle to effectively track and strike vessels navigating shipping lines through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. What is more, China is knowingly facilitating these attacks by purchasing 90% of Iran's oil. Do you believe Iran and China may be violating international law themselves by supporting the Houthis?
I wouldn't feel qualified to get into that area. I do believe there's potential violations of international maritime law on the protection of access into and out of areas that are required for transit. I couldn't evaluate those other areas that might be potential violations.
Have you approached the State Department about your concerns?
I have talked to the State Departments about shipping issues related to the attacks on merchant shipping, yes.
And has the State Department taken any action in response to your concerns?
Not yet.
In your judgment, why is it important to address the Houthi attacks on shipping and Iran's support for those attacks?
I mean, we go back historically. I think the last time that you'd seen a navigational strait under attack, military attack, was in 1800s when the Barbary pirates were attacking access into the Mediterranean. So there's always been an importance on a protection of navigational straits. They're sort of a maritime superhighway. So I believe that there should be more focus on restrictions. Right now, 80% of the cargo that went through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal is not going there.
Thank you. Dr. Chen, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. Please tell the committee, in your judgment, what in your background qualifies you to serve on the board of an entity that is at the intersection of both the public and private sectors.
Thank you, Ranking Member Cruz, for the question. I believe that I bring both experience in public policy as well as in business and, more importantly, in governance and oversight. The governance and oversight piece, Senator Cruz, I believe is particularly important at this stage of Amtrak's development and growth. I think it's important to have board members who understand the fiduciary responsibility that the board has to the American people, to the American taxpayer, to you who provide funding to Amtrak. I think I've got deep experience, particularly in the quasi-public setting, which makes Amtrak unique. And I also think that given my experience in public policy, understanding some of the challenges and issues that lie ahead with respect to implementation of the infrastructure bill, continued issues around how to improve customer service, looking at what the future of Amtrak will be in states throughout this country, I think that combination of policy and business background would be unique to the board. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that I'm from California, and I think representation on the national network is crucially important.
Well, having married a native Californian, I'll agree with that proposition as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Wicker.
Well, thank you, and congratulate all three of the nominees for being
Senator
selected.
Wicker, if I could just interrupt, before you arrived, Senator Romney praised the decor of this room. And so we want to give due gratitude to you and your leadership for this.
Well, yeah,
I think he expressed committee envy.
Yeah.
okay. Well, okay. If I might, before you start my clock running, of course, many things that begin as bad news turn out to be fortuitous. We were the first committee during my chairmanship to have an opportunity to redecorate because there was a flood on one of the floors above us, and it had to be repaired. But I think Senator Romney should also speak to my wife Gail about her sense of color and proportions. So thank you for that, and again, thank you to all the people who are here to serve. I'm here today because I am absolutely delighted at Dr. Chen's appointment to the Amtrak board, and I think Dr. Chen, you'll be a great addition. And I loved what you said about governance oversight and the fact that this is quasi-public and answers both to the customers and the public, as well as those of us who have a legislative sense. There will be soon, perhaps in January, perhaps in February of 2025, a new line reopened. It's been closed between Mobile, running through Mississippi with 4 stops and going to New Orleans on a twice-daily basis. We are very excited about this. It is amazing to me that a line that was that had to close because of Hurricane Katrina in 2005 has taken this long to be restored. But it's been a lot of work, and we've made a lot of assurances. As you know, Dr. Chen, the railroad companies got out of the passenger business in an agreement with Amtrak and the federal government that the Amtrak trains could run on the privately owned rail lines, and there would be an accommodation there. When it was clear that we were determined to reopen this line, there was naturally some concern, some questions by the freight rail lines as to how this would affect them, and eventually a lawsuit had to be filed by Amtrak before the Surface Transportation Board, which brought this matter to a head, and there was finally a settlement. The result really is that the freight lines have been enhanced, and that will accommodate more freight and also accommodate our hope to run this rail line on time and as an advantage to the people who live along the coastline between New Orleans. If we have a grand opening and a ribbon cutting, you're not averse to coming and visiting with your many friends on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi and being part of that grand opening, are you?
I look forward, Senator Wicker, to visiting, hopefully you and the great people of your state, and I too am looking forward to that reopening of service.
Thank you very much. We are excited about it, and the governments of all 3 states and the municipalities have been a part of this. I appreciate your answer to the distinguished chairwoman. about long-distance passenger rail. And let me just say on the record, she and I are together on that issue, and that answer was very reassuring to me. As someone who has had to make the trains run on time in other respects, do you have any thoughts about how we're going to make sure that the customer is going to be able, on all of our lines, to rely on reliable service and adherence to the schedules?
Senator, thank you for the question. The first priority of Amtrak needs to be safety, the safe transport of our passengers. But certainly reliability is a very important factor as well. There are a number of reasons why there have been challenges on the on-time issues. Some of that is because of the behavior of the host railroads, not making available right-of-way when they have been obligated to, and that's an issue that, as you noted, is being addressed via litigation. I would also say we have to make sure that Amtrak is making the necessary investments in fleet as well as in all of the administrative elements to make sure that we're doing our part to get passengers from A to B in a safe and timely manner. So it's a combination, I think, Senator, of ensuring that Amtrak's doing its job. But we also need our host railroads to do their job as well, to ensure that passengers are able to reliably get from where they're at to where they're going.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair, for passing along that compliment. You and I have been advocates of reliable quasi-government passenger rail for a long, long time, and I appreciate you continuing to ask the question about long-distance service. This is indeed a national agreement and something that should be able to work. And I'll just tell you, I don't know why someone like Dr. Chen hasn't been nominated long ago, because he's such an excellent public servant, and I welcome and support his nomination.
Thank
And
you,
yield back.
Senator
Thank you,
Wicker.
ma'am.
Thank you. And I think our last hearing of Amtrak nominees, we brought up the I-10 corridor, and just Amtrak is a big economic development tool that connects communities and builds capacity. And so we're just very big fans of this whole discussion on long-distance service throughout the West, throughout the South. You know, obviously the East Coast as an established service, but there's more to do to knit together very small communities that really would benefit from this and the traveling public. So thank you for emphasizing that so much. While we're waiting for some of our colleagues, I'm going to go to, oh, I see Senator Klobuchar. So we're not waiting. Senator Klobuchar.
Very good. Thank you, and thank you for holding this hearing. I think I'm going to start, Dr. Chen, about Amtrak here. Minnesota, you just added a route. Amtrak added a route between Chicago and Minnesota as part of the Empire Building. I would like to note that it's had ridership that no one expected. It's been very high, so we now have two routes. I think people like that. And so we want to just mention how important this is. And as you know, the Empire Builder route is one of Amtrak's largest rail lines, provides a vital link, contributes greatly to the economy. Can you speak, Mr. Chen, about the economic importance of long-distance routes? Because I know there's a lot of emphasis on the East Coast, get it, but how important that is for rural communities.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. The Empire Builder is an impressive route. Starts out in the west, actually, Senator Cantwell, and makes its way through the upper Midwest states. And all of Amtrak's long-distance routes are of critical importance to the economies of the states through which they run. We're talking about a few elements, Senator Klobuchar. First of all, is not just the well-paying good jobs that Amtrak itself creates, but also the economic vibrancy of the towns through which these routes run. It plays an important role in generating economic growth in those towns, but also, more importantly, provides for tourism and various elements that allow people to see parts of the country that they wouldn't be able to see otherwise. And so I think that that's why long distance is an important element of this. It is because it gives people that opportunity.
Yeah, and one pitch I want to make is that the DOT has prioritized this Northern Light Express route from Twin Cities to Duluth, and we're still working out some details on that, but we've been trying to get it done for quite a while, so I hope it's something that you can look at. Commissioner Bensel, thank you for your work on the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, for implementing it. I understand that the Federal Maritime Commission has already received over twice as many new cases in the first 2 months of 2024 as in the entire year of 2020. Could you talk about how the Ocean Shipping Reform Act has empowered shippers to file complaints about unreasonable practices?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. It's been a big change. The market is relatively restricted in that there's only a few carriers, 10 or 11, that are internationally providing services. So there's always been a little reticence of trying to engage in protecting yourself. I think the work that you did and your colleagues did on the committee.
Senator Thune, I would note, was the lead Republican on it. Yes.
Okay. Senator Thune and you and all of those that did that set up a simplified process for challenging these complaints. I think that was the singular most important thing that occurred to change the willingness to challenge what in certain cases can be allegations of unfair treatment and penalties that would be implemented as a result of that. We've also taken some steps in the agency. Our chairman directed an audit of all of the ocean carriers to review their practices. So we sort of have a carrot and stick approach to upgrading these invoices to make sure they're fair. But there were just an immense amount, I guess, I think in total $12 billion of assessments over the course of the pandemic, when you had congestion and it was difficult to pick up cargo and retrieve cargo and put your containers back. So I give a lot of the credit to this committee on what we've been able to achieve.
Thank you. Mr. Chapman, I have worked hard on a train derailment issue in Raymond, Minnesota with the rail company, with Burlington Northern, as well as with the NTSB. Appreciate that, and glad we passed the Railway Safety Act last May. And I think I'll ask you a question on the record about that, but in my remaining time, I wanted to ask you about close calls, runway incursions. There's been an alarming number of close calls on runways in recent years. Recent collision in January at the Tokyo airport, some close ones in the US. We need to ensure planes are equipped with, of course, existing technology that would alert pilots to the presence of other planes on the runway. Could you talk about how that technology would make planes safer and what else we should be doing to ward off what could be some accidents with disastrous consequences?
Absolutely, Senator, and thank you for the question. It's not a matter of just technology in the airplane, it's also technology at the airports to ensure that we're able to detect when an incursion is occurring or is about to occur, and then ensure that the people who most need to know that are alerted, and that includes controllers, but also those operating the aircraft, the crews on board the aircraft. We have technology that can do that. We need to ensure that that technology is in place, functioning. We have an outstanding safety record over particularly the last 15 years, but there are some serious red flags that all of us are aware of, all of us are taking very seriously. We need to pursue those and ensure that we address whatever is occurring out there that is resulting in this uptick in close calls.
Very good. Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. And we did give you and Senator Thune praise for your work in getting the Ocean Shipping Reform Act before the committee and everyone's hard work, and our colleague, Congressman Garamendi, for his work in the House.
And Rusty of South Dakota, Rusty
Yes.
Johnson. So, but it wouldn't have happened without you, Madam Chair. So thank you for your work.
Well, thanks to everybody. I think that is the way we solve these changing supply chain issues, so we're glad that Congress on this particular point paid attention to give our farmers really, and some of our other shippers really, the type of backup that they needed to deal with international carriers. So very excited about what the FMC has been able to achieve. But again, thank you for your leadership.
Thanks.
We will now, as we're waiting, well, I see, maybe Senator Capito, if you would like to go, that would be great. If not, I can give you a minute, so it's up to you. Senator Capito.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to all of the three gentlemen for being willing to take on some onerous roles, and I appreciate that. I'm going to start with the NTSB candidate, and I'd like to ask you, and we talked about this in my office on the train derailment issue in East Palestine. What lessons did the NTSB learn from the way you reacted and the way the reactions were that we can help with the community response in particular that we talked about, to be able to make sure that the community gets not just the full information, but as quickly as possible?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And I enjoyed our visit yesterday, and I enjoyed our discussion about this issue, which is very important. Certainly there were lots of lessons learned from the investigation itself. I have to say, from a sort of a process standpoint, as I indicated when we spoke yesterday, I felt that the on-site visits, the on-site meetings that we convened in East Palestine last summer before last, a two-day investigative hearing, and then this past summer, our final meeting and the adoption of our report. I felt that those were incredibly productive, helpful exercises in terms of demonstrating support, concern, listening to the community, helping the community understand that there are people out there that are sensitive to their concerns and the harm that they've suffered as a result of that horrible accident. I think that it's not something we can do all the time, but I do think it's something that's a very useful exercise when you have a particularly egregious incident like East Palestine.
Yeah, and I think it's something that you told me yesterday that has stuck with me, and I think is certainly true in cases like this. People want to be heard. They want to feel like you care, that you're listening, and that whatever formulations you're taking in are going to have an impact on what your decisions might be in the future. So I appreciate that. Mr. Chen, again, thank you for the visit. And a topic I brought up with you, and if you ascend to the board, which I plan to support your nomination for that, the prices at Amtrak are going up, some of them pretty steep, particularly what I see at the Northeast Corridor. How do you address that? I mean, not so much do you bring them down. I'm not asking for that kind of a promise. I'm like, what kind of lens do you look through when you're looking at pricing?
Senator Capito, thank you for the question. I think it's something I look forward to digging into. There is obviously a business question, which is what is the optimal pricing to ensure that all the different factors that need to be accounted for are accounted for. But there are other factors as well. For example, we want to make sure that we're investing in the right technology so that the rails are safe. I think that's important. We want to make sure that we do everything we can to keep the trains timely, and all that requires resources. And so it's something I look forward to looking into more if I am confirmed, because certainly we also want it to be affordable. We want people to be able to access the rail experience as well.
Right, and it's obviously it's important in certain corridors for ease of traffic, but you know, as I always say, you want to make sure the trains run on time. But at the same time, it is rather eye-popping, at least for me, when I look to price a ticket, that it seems as though the prices have gone up. The service, the only change I see in the service, and it has been very much on time, which I appreciate, has been the assigned seating, which I hear people grousing about all the time. But I actually kind of like it because then you know where you're going, you know where you're going to sit. So I would encourage you to keep that aspect of it. Mr. Bensel, I've been asked about and I don't, excuse me if you've been asked this question, and welcome, about the possibility of a dock worker strike. The
this would have really devastating effects on all kinds of goods and services. As we're moving into the holiday season, I'm sure that's something that a lot of merchants are thinking about as well. Where are you all on this, and do you have any indications as to what the administration is thinking?
Well, statutorily, our agency is actually immunized from the collective bargaining process. We're not supposed to get involved in it. We're more involved on the consumer side. So we have provided some advice to consumers who may be impacted, shipping consumers, to ensure that they still have rights and protections at the Federal Maritime Commission. That went out yesterday. It is a big, huge economic concern. It worries me because of the volume of trade that our economy needs and relies on. So it is in the collective bargaining process, which is sort of immunized from a lot of the other elements of government. So I'm hopeful that they'll get an agreement to not go into a work dispute. I'm in contact when the administration calls to ask about some of the industry participants, and I'll continue to do that on an ad hoc basis. But we're mostly out of the game other than protecting the rights of consumers during this strike.
Okay, let me just ask one quick little follow-up question here, just for history and my own edification. They renegotiate every 5 years, correct? Am I correct on that?
It depends, but there's basically an agreement, coastwise agreement on the West Coast that covers Vancouver to San Diego, and then a Atlantic and Gulf Coast agreement. So they can negotiate the terms, but 5 or 6 years is usually the terms.
Is it customary that we get this close to have we gotten this close to a strike in the recent past?
No. In the East Coast, traditionally, there's been a little bit more labor peace, freedom. It's been a little bit more contentious on the West Coast. In this case, what happened was the ocean carriers had incredible profits during the pandemic, and the labor union was not with a rate structure that reflected that, and so they're far apart on wages.
I see. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Capito. I'm going to turn to you now, Mr. Chapman, but I just want to say to my colleagues, if there's anybody else who plans to come to the hearing, now would be a great time to do it. Otherwise, after my questions, we'll probably close out. But Mr. Chapman, I didn't get a chance to ask you in the first round, so I have a couple of different issues I want to cover. First, June of this year marked the 25th anniversary of the Olympic pipeline explosion in Bellingham, Washington, which killed 3 children. The company's negligence was so severe that multiple company executives were sentenced to jail, and the judge in the case decried the lack of effective federal oversight. One of the issues we've had concern about is the lack of resources preventing NTSB from being an effective safety watchdog in the accident part. The board failed to investigate the 2022 Keystone leak, which resulted in the largest onshore oil spill in the last decade, and other leak in Mississippi, which struck dozens of people, making them sick. So the FAA authorization bill, which we all fought hard for here, authorized an 8% increase in funding for NTSB. How would those additional resources help the NTSB effectively investigate accidents in the pipeline area?
First of all, Madam Chair, thank you to you and the committee for your support and your good work on the FAA reauthorization generally, but specifically with regard to the NTSB component of that. Very important, and very important with respect to the resources made available to us, the authorized funding levels. The staffing is certainly our biggest challenge at NTSB. We're a small agency, and we can only be where we have the staff to allow us to be. And so the increase in funding that we've seen over this last year or so and the increase in reauthorization is very helpful to us with regard to those staffing levels, pipeline and rail to the areas where we frankly need the most help, I think. That and highway, I would say, where we have some real challenges.
What is the expertise you think we need at NTSB on pipeline?
Well, the sorts of folks, first of all, that have that kind of expertise, that's a fairly limited group of people. So we need to be able to attract those people to the agency, ensure that we can make it attractive enough for them to stay. But we need folks that do have experience and expertise in pipeline issues, and the increased resources will help us in that regard.
Thank you. You mentioned in your opening statement about traffic fatalities and the leading cause. Last year, we had over 40,000 people die in accidents on our road. You were saying intoxicated driving and speeding are two of the biggest issues. What are the most important things that we can do now to improve the safety on our transportation system?
Well, we have a lot of tools in the toolbox. I believe strongly that with regard to, frankly, what I see as the three biggest challenges, certainly impairment, alcohol impairment specifically is still a huge problem for us. Speeding, excessive speed, and then distraction as well. I believe that technology has a major role to play in helping us address those issues going forward. We have a lot of technology on our automobiles right now that, frankly, a lot of folks aren't even aware is there. They don't know, and that's not all bad, because often it's working passively. But there's more we can do with regard to alcohol impairment. We've recommended installation of passive alcohol detection technology on all newly manufactured vehicles, or driver monitoring systems that can detect alcohol impairment, as well as, by the way, fatigue or distraction, or those technologies in combination. We think that has a lot of potential for addressing alcohol impairment going forward. We believe that with regard to speeding, intelligent speed assistance, technology that will at a minimum warn a driver when they've exceeded the speed, or at least exceeded it by a certain amount. Distraction, again, driver monitoring systems hold a lot of promise. There are plenty of other tools that we're working on. We're advocating 0.05 blood alcohol content with regard to alcohol impairment. We'd like to see all the states adopt 0.05. I spent a lot of time on that issue, but I do think the technology has a lot of promise moving forward.
And does the NTSB have the expertise in emerging technologies?
We do have that expertise, and these are major areas of focus for us in terms of traffic safety.
Well, I think this would be a subject that the committee would like to hear about in the future and understand that expertise and those recommendations and the illumination of, as Chair Hamady has said in the past, the lessons of an accident investigation and what are the top 10 things we should do. I think that would be, particularly as it relates to our highways, something the committee should look at in the future.
I know the chair would agree with me. This is our Chair Hamady would agree with me. This is our number one concern. Our number one priority is getting our arms around the tragedy on our highways.
Thank you. If I could turn to the NTSB's two-day investigation hearing on August 6th and August 7th into the Alaska Airline Flight 1282 door plug accident. The board examined the FAA's oversight of manufacturers, including production line audits, the FAA 102 audits from January and February of this year found widespread safety failings at both Boeing and Spirit Aerosystems, even after the FAA told me in an April letter that they had conducted a collective 298 audits of both manufacturers in the past years. This was an effort with then acting administrator Billy Nolan to get response to the need for audits. At NTSB's investigative hearing, the FAA highlighted its work to implement enhanced across-aviation system safety. However, after hundreds of FAA audits over the last 2 years, we are still seeing persistent production quality issues. So this does not reassure the traveling public that the FAA is identifying proactively the issues in front of the agency, let alone the issues about the manufacturers, but its oversight in general. Based on the NTSB's preliminary investigations, do you think it's important for the FAA to have an effective agency-wide safety management system to strengthen the coordinated effectiveness oversight?
I do, Senator, and I support the concepts that are represented in the legislation that I know that you've introduced. We are big advocates of safety management systems. And that certainly is not limited to private sector operators. I think there's a lot to be said for embracing the principles of safety management systems in government and at the FAA. As you undoubtedly saw during the hearing, there I would say 3 areas that we're particularly focused on. And I don't want to get too far ahead of our investigators on this, but at least in terms of the way I saw the discussion at the hearing, certainly we want to find out exactly what happened, specifically what happened. But we also are focused heavily on Boeing's safety culture, but also FAA's oversight, and I would go so far as to say FAA's safety culture as well.
Well, I think in that regard, that is why we've called for an SMS, but instead of just, I think where the committee has been, as people allowed for a voluntary SMS, you can see through the expert panel testimony, a lot of confusion on the ground out at Boeing about what that even means, or if there is one safety system or reporting. I did like that FAA Administrator Whitaker did testify before this committee that yes, the workforce should have a direct pipeline system, that is, be able to raise safety awareness issues directly to the FAA without being somehow gone through a process first at the company. So very much appreciated that. But we need the FAA to have a robust safety system, management system too. And so I think Senator Duckworth and I, the co-chair of the subcommittee, have looked at this issue and thought the expert panel did such great work that exactly how an SMS would be used at the FAA would be a helpful tool, as opposed to just going through another process where somebody implements a half step on safety management system. I don't know if you could speak to this, but the board's consideration of FAA production line audits during the investigation, do you think it's important the FAA be able to conduct surprise audits or short notice on these safety and quality issues?
I know that your legislation that you and Senator Duckworth have put forward calls for shortening the time frame. I don't know that we have a recommendation. I don't believe we do have a recommendation on that specifically. I personally support it. I think that these audits are effective when they're conducted on relatively short notice. We shouldn't be essentially signaling that this is coming and allowing operators, manufacturers to sort of clean up the place before the audit occurs.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And again, thank you for your willingness to serve another term. I thought if I put out a clarion call for all members that somehow my colleague from Alaska would show up. And so, would you like to ask questions now, Senator Sullivan?
I just have one question. Safety. I always think about safety and vulnerability. And I don't want to give bad people ideas, but occasionally when you drive when you take Amtrak, you see vulnerabilities. So what are we thinking about? You've had some issues on trains in Europe and stuff. How are we thinking about that? Mr. Chen.
Senator, thank you for the question. I think, first of all, we need to make sure that we're investing enough in the infrastructure that we need to ensure safe passage of passengers on Amtrak rails.
But you know what I mean? If like a bad guy wanted to get on a train and do some damage to passengers, the way they've done on airplanes, it looks like, again, I don't like giving people ideas, but I hope we're doing more, I hope we have more kind of stuff going on that maybe you don't see as a writer. You know what I mean?
It's something, if confirmed, Senator, I'll commit to working on. I think it's important, and I agree with you, because safety should be the first priority, no question about it.
And just maybe a kind of deep dive on vulnerabilities, given what's happened in, passenger trains overseas.
Senator, certainly that's something I'm happy to commit to if confirmed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's the one question I had.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. And I'm assuming, Dr. Chen, that Amtrak working with other agencies on threats and on hardening the safety procedures are a critical aspect of what you think needs to happen.
Indeed, Chair Cantwell, that interaction is very important.
What we don't want to have happen is have something happen and then we react. You know what I mean? We need to be proactive. And if you get on and just walk around, you can see vulnerabilities. And I don't want to make it like getting on an airplane, but we can still do a lot to prevent, you know, bad guys from hurting the Amtrak passenger and scaring people.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Thank you for being here this morning. Before we close today's hearing, I have one more question, which is to ask all the nominees, if confirmed, will you pledge to work collaboratively with this committee, provide thorough and timely responses to our requests, and information that, as we put together and address important policy issues, appear before the committee as requested?
I will.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that commitment. I kind of thought that would be the answer, and very much appreciate that. Senators will have until close of business Monday, September 30th, to submit questions for the record to the committee. Witnesses will have until close of business October 7th to respond to those questions. Thank you all again for being here and your testimony. That concludes today's hearing.